hadn't eaten in days, and the man meant to protect me treated me like a stranger. The memory of that night lives in my bones like a splinter, something small and sharp that never quite works its way out, no matter how much time passes, no matter how far I run. My name is Selene Ashford. And once upon a time, I believed in the mate bond the way children believe in sunrise, not because anyone proved it to me, but because everything in my blood told me it was real, it was sacred, it was coming. I was wrong about the sacred part. The Ironwood Pack occupied the eastern ridge of the Cascades, a sprawling territory of pine forest and cold rivers, where the Alpha's lodge sat on a hilltop like a throne above a kingdom that didn't know it was suffering. I had grown up on the edges of that kingdom. My mother had been an Omega, the lowest rank in pack hierarchy, and when she died of fever the winter I turned 16. I inherited her rank along with her threadbare coat and her habit of making herself small in doorways. Omegas didn't eat with the pack. We took what was left. For 2 years, what was left had been enough. Scraps from the beta table, bruised apples from the orchard nobody else bothered with, dried venison when the hunters were generous. I had learned to read hunger the way other wolves read weather, to know the difference between one more and I need to sit down right now, to stretch a cup of broth into something that resembled a meal through sheer force of will. Then came the week the Alpha declared a victory feast. Some territorial dispute with the Greymore Pack to the north had been settled in Ironwood's favor. 3 days of celebration. 3 days of roasting pits and barrels of mead and whole tables bowing under the weight of food. 3 days during which every Omega in the pack was put to work, cooking, serving, cleaning, and expressly forbidden from eating until the feast was over. By the third morning, my hands were shaking when I carried the platters. By the third afternoon, I had stopped being able to smell the food without my vision going white at the edges. By the third evening, I did something I had never done in 2 years of surviving on the edge of Ironwood territory. I begged. I found him at the far end of the great hall, leaning against a stone pillar with a goblet in his hand and the easy authority of someone who had never once questioned whether he belonged somewhere. Alpha Cain Voss, 24 years old, 6 feet and 3 inches of dark hair and darker eyes, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the ridge his lodge sat upon. I had known who he was my entire life, the way you know the name of a mountain, distantly, with respect, with no expectation that the mountain would ever notice you. What I had not known, what nobody had told me, because nobody in the pack thought to tell an Omega anything, was what would happen the first time I stood close enough to him that the wind shifted. It hit me before I even opened my mouth. The mate bond. They describe it differently in every story I'd ever heard. A click, some people said, a warmth, a recognition. Like finding a room in your own house you'd never known existed and somehow knowing immediately that it was yours. For me, it felt like someone pressed their palm flat against my sternum and pushed, not violently, but with absolute certainty. Here. This is the direction. This has always been the direction. I stopped walking. My grip on the empty serving platter went slack. He looked up, and I watched his nostrils flare. He felt it too. I know he did. I have replayed that moment 10,000 times in the years since, and I have never once convinced myself I imagined the half-second of stillness that came over him, the way his hand tightened on the goblet, the way something shifted behind his eyes, quick and complicated, before his expression closed like a shutter snapping shut. He felt it, and then he looked at me, really looked, the way you assess something you're deciding what to do with, and I watched him catalog everything. The Omega mark on my wrist, my worn clothing, the tremor in my hands I hadn't been able to hide for the last 6 hours. I lifted my chin. Alpha Voss. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I apologize for interrupting. I haven't eaten since before the feast began. 3 days. I was wondering if I might. He reached into the pocket of his coat. I genuinely thought, for one mortifying, luminous second, that he was going to press food into my hands. That the bond had moved him the way it had moved me. That whatever calculated expression he'd arranged his face into was about to crack open into something real. He pulled out a handful of coins. Silver. 4 of them, maybe 5. He didn't count. He tossed them, actually tossed them, a casual flick of the wrist, the way you throw scraps to a stray, and they hit the stone floor at my feet with a sound like small, cold laughter. There's a trader's cart at the south gate, he said. Buy yourself something. Then he turned back to his conversation. As if I were already gone. I stood there for 3 seconds. I counted them, later, because counting was the only thing that kept me from doing something that would have gotten me thrown out of the pack entirely. 3 seconds with the coins at my feet and the bond humming in my chest like a plucked string and the understanding settling into me cold and final. He knows. He knows and he doesn't want it. He knows and he chose this. I bent down and picked up the coins. Not because I was grateful. Because I was hungry enough to die. And pride is a luxury that omegas cannot afford. I walked to the south gate, and I bought a meat pie from the trader's cart, and I sat behind the woodshed in the dark, and I ate it alone, and I did not cry. Crying was also a luxury. Part 2. What silence costs. The next 3 months were an education in invisible cruelty. Cain Voss never touched me, never raised his voice at me, never did anything that another wolf could point to and call wrongdoing. He was, by every observable standard, indifferent to my existence. The same polite, distant indifference an alpha might show any omega in his pack, but I felt the bond every single day. That was the part nobody warned you about. That you would feel it even when the other person was pretending it wasn't there. That it would sit in your chest like a compass needle, always pointing toward him regardless of whether the destination wanted to be found. That you would walk into a room and know immediately that he had been there 20 minutes ago, because something in your hindbrain lit up like a signal fire. I tried to be angry. Anger was cleaner than the alternative. I catalogued everything, the coins on the floor, the turned back, the 3 months of careful, deliberate nothing. I lined these things up in my mind like evidence and told myself they were enough. That they were sufficient reason to feel only contempt for Alpha Cain Voss of Ironwood Pack. Then I would round a corner and nearly walk into him, and the evidence would scatter like startled birds. And I would feel the bond pull with such force that I had to grip the nearest wall to stay vertical. This was the cruelty of it. He was rejecting something that was also mine. He was throwing away something that belonged to both of us. And I had no say in it because I was an omega and he was an alpha, and the distance between those 2 words in Ironwood Pack was roughly the distance between the ridge and the valley floor. I started making plans. Not revenge. Nothing so clean or satisfying. Just exit plans. If I could save enough coin, if I could map the border territories carefully enough, if I could identify which neighboring packs had the kind of leadership that might be willing to offer sanctuary to an unmated omega with no rank and no connections, then maybe the bond would eventually stretch thin enough to stop hurting. They said it was possible, rumored, anyway, that if a mate bond went long enough without being acknowledged, it could fray, weaken, never disappear entirely, but become background noise rather than a constant frequency. I was willing to settle for background noise. I was 3 weeks away from having enough coin saved for travel when everything changed. Part 3. The night the ridge shook, the Greymore Pack did not stay settled. Whatever territorial agreement Ironwood had celebrated with 3 days of feasting apparently had a shorter shelf life than the mead on a Tuesday in November, with snow coming sideways off the mountains. Greymore wolves crossed the northern border in numbers that suggested this was not a skirmish but an invasion. I was in the storage cellar beneath the main lodge, taking inventory, which was Omega work, unglamorous and essential, when the alarm hall went up. 3 long notes. The signal for all wolves to defensive positions. I knew what that meant for Omegas. Not fighting positions, shelter. The lower levels of the lodge, the reinforced rooms, the places designed to keep the pack's most vulnerable members safe while the warriors handled whatever needed handling. What it did not account for was what happened when the fighting came to the storage cellar. I heard them before I saw them. 2 Greymore scouts who had apparently found the cellar entrance that the pack had always considered a secondary, barely worth guarding access point. They weren't wrong to find it. They were very wrong to think it would be unoccupied. I am an Omega. I have been an Omega my entire life. But I am also a wolf, and I grew up on the margins of a pack where nobody was going to protect me except myself, and I had been learning how to be dangerous in quiet ways for years. The first scout made it 3 steps into the cellar. The second one made it 6. I was not uninjured. A gash along my left forearm, another across my ribs where a knife had caught me in the dark, less bad than they might have been, worse than I would have liked. I was sitting against the far wall pressing my sleeve to the arm wound, when the cellar door opened a 3rd time and Cain Voss came through it. He took in the scene. He took a long moment doing it, then his eyes found me in the shadows, and the expression that crossed his face, the one that lasted maybe a full second before he locked it down behind alpha composure, was not indifference. It was terror. "You're hurt," he said. His voice was doing something strange, tight and controlled at the same time. "I'm fine. Selene, the scouts are handled. There were only 2. You should check whether." He crossed the cellar in the time it took me to finish the sentence and was crouching in front of me, his hands moving to assess the wounds with a focused, methodical precision that I recognized from watching him deal with pack business, that quality of attention he gave to things that mattered. I went very still. "This needs stitching." He was looking at my arm. His jaw was tight. "I know how to stitch a wound." "I'll do it." "You don't have to." "Selene." He said my name like it was the only word he knew, and he was furious at himself for knowing it. He lifted his eyes to mine, and all the careful indifference was gone, and what was underneath it was exhausting in its complexity, guilt and want and something that looked terrifyingly like grief. "Let me do this." I was 3 weeks from having enough coin to leave. I let him stitch the wound. Part 4. What an alpha admits in the dark he didn't leave after. I expected him to. I had built my entire strategy around his capacity for walking away, and when he simply stayed, sat back against the opposite wall of the cellar with his forearms resting on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance, I didn't know what to do with it. "Say what you're going to say," I told him eventually, "or go." A long pause. I knew. His voice was quiet. "That night at the feast. I knew the moment you walked in." "I know you knew." My arm throbbed under the bandage. "You threw coins at me." The sound he made was almost a flinch. I panicked. "You panicked." He stopped. Started again. "You were an Omega." "You are an Omega." "My pack already." Another stop. His hands moved, a frustrated gesture. "The betas would have used it against me." Any sign of weakness, any suggestion that I was going to make decisions based on something other than pack strength, and everything I've been building for 2 years comes apart. I was 24 years old and I had been alpha for 8 months, and I was holding together a pack that my father left me half destroyed. And then you walked into that hall and the whole world shifted, and I threw coins at me. I said again. Not loudly. Not with heat. Just clearly, because I wanted him to have to sit with the specific shape of what he had done. Silence. "Yes," he said. "I threw coins at you." I looked at him, really looked, the way I hadn't let myself look in 3 months because looking at him was expensive in ways I couldn't afford. He looked tired. Not in the way that meant he needed sleep, but in the way that meant he had been at war with himself for a long time and hadn't been winning. Good. He should be tired. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I watched you sit behind that woodshed. His voice was rough. After the feast. I watched you from a window. You sat in the dark and you ate that pie and you looked, he exhaled. You looked the way I felt. And I did that to you. I made you feel that way. And I've been making you feel that way for 3 months and stop. The word came out sharp. Don't do this because you feel guilty. I'm not doing it because I feel guilty. Then why? Because you're mine. It came out of him like something that had been pressurized for a long time, not loud, but with a force behind it that made the air feel different. He met my eyes and didn't look away. And I have spent 3 months telling myself that it didn't matter, that the pack comes first, that an alpha cannot afford the vulnerability of a mate bond, especially not an omega mate bond, especially not with the pack watching every decision I make, and every single argument I made was completely correct and completely worthless, because you are mine and I have been discarding you like you were nothing and it has been eating me alive. The cellar was very quiet. Outside, somewhere above us, the battle was still happening. We could hear the distant clash of it, muffled by stone. I don't want to be yours because the alternative finally became uncomfortable enough, I said. That's fair. I don't want to be claimed when it's convenient and ignored when it isn't. That's fair too. I'm an omega. My voice stayed level. Your pack, the betas, the warriors, they will never fully accept an omega Luna. You know that. Whatever you're feeling right now in this cellar, you're going to walk out those doors and back into a pack that has opinions about hierarchy, and those opinions are not going to change because the alpha had a complicated night in a storage room. Cain was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful in a new way, not the careful of someone managing a conversation, but the careful of someone choosing words that have to carry real weight. 6 months ago, he said, I would have agreed with everything you just said. I would have told myself it was wisdom, pragmatism, the responsible choice. He looked at his hands. 3 months ago, I told myself the same thing while I threw coins at my mate on a cold floor, and I have not had a single night of real sleep since. He looked up. I don't want to be a person who makes that choice again. I don't know if I can rebuild what I broke. I don't know if you'll let me try. But I'm done pretending the bond isn't there because pretending has a cost too. And I've been paying it on your behalf without your permission, and that was wrong. I thought about the coins. About the woodshed. About 3 months of a compass needle that never stopped pointing. Show me, I said finally. Not here, not tonight. Not in a cellar after a fight when everything is heightened and easy. Show me out there in ordinary time, in front of your betas and your warriors. Show me what you choose when there's no knife wound and no adrenaline and no dramatic moment making it simple. He held my gaze. Okay, he said. Part 5, the long way back he showed me, not perfectly. Not without stumbles and setbacks and moments when the pack politics were genuinely difficult, and I watched him navigate them with the tightness of someone walking a wire. There were betas who curled their lips. There were whispered conversations I was not meant to hear. There were 3 separate incidents in the first month where senior wolves tested the edges of whatever I was now allowed to be, in ways that were sophisticated enough to be deniable and pointed enough to be deliberate. Cain handled every single one of them, not by shouting, not by threatening, by the steady, unmistakable application of alpha authority to the principle that what he claimed was claimed. And the pack's opinion about rank and worthiness was welcome to exist right up until the moment it attempted to express itself in his presence, at which point it would encounter a problem. He was not gentle about it, but he was consistent, and consistency, I was learning, was worth more than any grand gesture. He learned things about me too. That I had been studying pack law in the hours I should have been sleeping, because knowledge was the only currency I'd ever had reliable access to. That I had a talent for mediation, for reading the actual source of a conflict beneath whatever people claimed it was about, that had gone entirely unused because Omegas weren't asked to mediate anything. That I was genuinely funny, in a dry and devastating way, when I wasn't spending my energy on survival. He started bringing me problems, pack disputes, trading negotiations, the ongoing headache of the northern border. He would sit across from me and lay out the situation and then listen, actually listen, with the focused attention he had previously reserved for emergencies, while I thought through it. Out loud, "Why didn't you ever tell anyone about this?" he asked one evening, after I'd untangled a property dispute that had been festering for 2 years and apparently hadn't been resolvable by anyone with an official rank. "Nobody asked," I said simply. He looked like that hit him somewhere specific. "I should have asked 3 months ago." "You should have asked the night at the feast," I said. "But we're here now." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. We were very still for a moment, both of us feeling the bond hum in that particular key it hit, when you stopped fighting it, low and warm and inexorable, like a river finding its level. "I have something for you," he said. He set a small object on the table between us, a coin, silver, old, slightly worn, the kind of coin someone might find on a cellar floor. "I kept it," he said quietly. "I found it after that night. I kept it because I wanted to have to look at it every day. To remember what I was choosing when I chose wrong." A pause. "I want you to have it. Not as an apology. Apologies are cheap. As a record. Something that goes with you wherever you go. So that wherever I am, wherever we are, we both remember that I can choose wrong, and that choosing right is something I have to keep doing. Not once. Not in a cellar under fire. Every ordinary day." I looked at the coin for a long time. Then I picked it up and folded it into my palm. "Don't throw the next one," I said. A sound escaped him, short, sharp, and done. He looked at me and his expression was the most unguarded thing I had ever seen on an alpha's face. "Never again," he said. "I swear it on the bond. Never again." Epilogue. Luna. The ceremony was in spring. Not elaborate. I had not wanted elaborate, and Cain had not pushed for it. What I had wanted was small and true and witnessed by the people who had been there through the ordinary days. And that is what I got. My rank changed on the records from Omega to Luna. Some of the betas still had opinions. They were welcome to them. An opinion voiced in the Luna's presence had a way of becoming an education in why that was unwise. And over the course of a year the education had been sufficiently thorough that the opinions had mostly migrated to places where I couldn't hear them. That suited me fine. I had never asked anyone to love me. I had only ever asked to be treated as if my survival mattered. It turned out, once you establish that baseline, a great deal else became possible. I kept the coin. It lived on a chain around my neck, an odd piece of jewelry, nothing beautiful about it. Slightly misshapen from a century of passing through various hands before it ended up on that great hall floor. Pack visitors sometimes noticed it and asked what it was. I always told them it was a reminder. A reminder of what, they would ask. That kindness is a choice, I would say. And so is cruelty. And so is everything in between. The bond just shows you who your person is. What you do about it, that part is always yours. Cain would be somewhere in earshot when I said this. He always was, not in the watchful way he'd once maintained distance, but in the way of someone who had decided that proximity was where he wanted to live. He never had anything to add. He had already said everything that needed saying, back in the cellar, in the dark, while the battle moved overhead and to Greymore scouts lay unconscious against the wall and my arm bled through a sleeve I'd pressed against it. "You are mine. Not a possession. Not a claim in the cold," hierarchical sense the word had always carried in this pack. A belonging in both directions. The only kind that lasts. I had begged for food once, hollow-cheeked and shaking, and the man the bond chose for me had thrown coins at my feet. He spent the rest of his life learning to be worthy of the woman who picked them up. I spent the rest of mine deciding, one ordinary day at a time, that he had earned the right to keep trying. We were both still learning. That, I had come to believe, was the whole point.